Hello, YouTube. Welcome to Emergency Podcast. I'm Nigel,
And I'm Ian.
and we're back. We're back for an episode, the third episode about the things that are holding the country back. We've talked about jobs, we've talked about the services or the lack of services that we have in the country, and now third and final on the list is community.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, Ian. I've been racking my brain about what we mean about by this. So, what do you mean by community? What does community mean to you in this context?
I, despite all of the people who always start talking about grand visions of your country and flags and things are quite important at the moment, community is always starts off with you, neighbours, your street, your immediate surroundings, and then widens out into the town or the area that you live in. Then maybe the region, Lancashire with us when we were growing up, and then you get quite a long way down the list before you start getting to notions of nation. Right? For most people, that's how I define it.
It's really interesting that you put it like that. And it's not that I disagree, but I think it's probably that what a lot of people seem to be tapping into when they talk about community now is this idea of national identity, right? And that sense, or that's the feel I seem to get from a lot of people right now. I'm not saying that I agree with that. I actually agree with you that the community I think of when people talk about, oh, it used to be so much better back in the day, they're really talking about the sense of community they had on their
Yes,
street
absolutely.
parties,
Absolutely.
and being able to drop your kids at your neighbours and all of that stuff that I guess we took for granted back then, we had back then, which a lot of people feel does not exist anymore.
What part of the reason why we moved to Scotland 4.5 years ago and moved into, I say, a small village, so there's just under 1,000 of us. The community that we've got here is unbelievable. We do things together as a community that would not have been dreamed of when I lived in suburbia. Right? It really does go back to one of the earliest memories that I've got of community in action was Charles and Diana's wedding. We did a street party. I was 5. And I just remember all the tables and things being laid out, and basically the road was shut, and we're on a cul-de-sac anyway, but no one was driving about, and all the kids were all playing together, and it was almost like, ooh, why are we all doing this? But we do stuff like that here as a community. We've got a village hall, and we put loads of events and stuff on. I was at a village quiz literally the weekend before last. So that doesn't sound exciting, but when you've got a couple of hundred people in there and there's a real buzz about the place, it's great, right? That is the community that I think people are nostalgic for because largely it's gone.
Yeah, and look, this is a really tricky and complex debate as I was thinking about this one in terms of not just what do we mean by community, but why has it gone? Why has it disappeared? And I mean, look, the seeds of
This is why it's disappeared.
yes, exactly, and I absolutely will come on to that because but for me, that's the final nail in the coffin. That's not where it started, right? It's like because if we think about what the type of community you've just described what that was born out of. It was born out of, again, the social reforms post World War II and the idea that we had great industries where communities were built around those industries. So, again, everybody worked often at the same place or at similar places. If we think about the industrial part of UK, we didn't have a globalized community at that point. We really didn't have any of that. It was all about your local community. But that started to change. Arguably, it started to change probably in the 1960s with technological progress, with the freedoms that started to come with better education, better opportunity for people. So people did start to not necessarily move all over the world, but they started to move out from their immediate communities and into other parts of the town or the cities that they were in. But I mean, I'll never hold back on an opportunity to stick the boot in on good old Maggie. But for me, the thing that accelerated it, without a shadow of a doubt, was that period, right? Margaret
Yep.
Thatcher. She famously said, "What was it? There's no such thing as society. There are individual men, individual women, and families, and that's it."
I
Right?
think that gets taken out of context quite a lot,
It
but
does.
it's indisputable that she did say it.
Yeah. And but again, she also came from a mindset from a world where she was very driven by this concept of individual freedom, the power of the individual, and the idea. And when we look at what she did through the 1980s, not just that speech, but ultimately the deindustrialization of the country, take away those industries that communities were built around, what are they going to do? What reason do they
Yep.
have to remain bonded as a community? Add in something like right to buy, right? That once you start to sell off council
Yeah.
stock and not replace it, other people start to move in, people start to move out because they have the opportunity to do so. And again, I'm dwelling on words like opportunity because this for me is why it's complex, because there were negatives about the concept of what we call community back in
Sure.
the day, in that they were very rigid. They were quite closed. They
Yeah.
didn't necessarily have an opportunity to it. If you were a kid growing up and you were not destined, you were not destined to be a coal miner and you lived in a coal mining community, your opportunity to get out of that was actually quite limited, or it could be.
Or horror show, you were gay, or you were smart, or you were rebellious, or whatever else. Absolutely.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why I think. And look, to bring it back to, not to make this an entire history show, but to bring it back to the final thing the first thing that you brought up, which was that mobile phone, that smartphone, it accelerated even more with globalization, with the concept of the digital world. The tech bros out there would argue that we are a more connected society than ever, that we have people we can talk to all over the world, which has immense benefits. It
Yep.
does. But if you are a family of 4 or 5 in your house and the only communication you do when you're living in the same building is messaging each other, what's for tea, have you done your homework, how was school, which again, we all do,
I
right?
was going to say, I'm putting my hand up because absolutely, we've got a family WhatsApp group for the people who
Absolutely.
live in my house.
Yeah,
Not
exactly.
not
And
family
you are
elsewhere,
not
in my house.
and you are not the only family, right? But a lot of families do. And look, there are immense benefits to the technological progress we have had. Immense benefits. The opportunity you and I have had to not be. We do not live in the communities that we were raised in, right? We both left our hometowns, moved on to other places, went to university, did what we did with our careers.
Mm.
That opportunity has come because of the personal freedoms and aspirations, the aspiration style society that's been created. But it is very individual, right? It is very selfish from that
But
perspective.
you've just used the A word, aspiration, which,
Tony Blair,
right, well, Thatcher as well, right?
yeah,
So I'm one of these. I'm one of these people who grew up where Thatcher was boo, right? But the older and greyer that I get, and the more I drift into the political centre, the more you start reassessing some of these things. Look, the whole aspiration to better yourself and to make more of those opportunities and things. There's a whole load of things where Thatcher accelerated that for some people, held it back for others, admittedly, but society evolved. But society's always. And I think that what a lot of people are talking about now when they complain about, my community isn't the same as it used to be, and very specifically, all of these other people coming in. Well, at the moment, they might have a specific bogeyman where apparently it's brown people, right? That's the complaint. Even where they're in communities where, with respect to it, it's almost entirely white, yeah, there is still this bogey thing that they're being fed. They're not the thing that they're saying that they're concerned about might not even be happening there, but what's bothering them is change. And a lot of it is people who are younger than them aspiring to do things differently to the way that they want it to be done. And there is definitely an age demographic split in so much of this. Where you look at the people who are getting the angriest, they tend to be older. And the younger people are the more aspirational, the more wanting to go out there and move, as we both did. And there is a divide that I think we're really going to struggle to bridge as this conversation goes on.
yeah. I mean, look, there's generational divides, but there's also the complexity of, we're talking about again globalization here as well. That we live in a world, we can't change that. No one government can change that. That is the way society has adapted and changed. And I think for the better, It's just the problem is that there's a lot of people who get left behind because,
Right.
yeah, right,
Right, but let's sorry to interrupt, but like that left behind bit, that is what people are protesting about. With respect to
exactly.
it, they might be talking about asylum seekers, and frankly, it's always Muslims, right? That's what they're really banging on about at the moment. They've had this thing weaponized that Muslims are bad, which is stupid, right? But what they're talking about is the fact that they feel like they have been left behind with opportunities with all of these things. I've knocked on doors, right, doing politics, knocked on doors in very, very white places, and people are complaining about asylum seekers and immigrants taking the jobs and the opportunities and filling up the doctors. You're like, hang on a second. That's none of it here. That's not your community that you're talking about at all. But they're absolutely obsessed with the idea that it is. And it's that disconnection from reality, which is where, with respect to it, these don't help because people are sat. How did you describe it before we start going? People literally just swiping and
Yeah,
swiping
yeah,
and
swiping through
reels and reels
videos,
of
reels and
content
reels.
being
Yeah.
fed at them and thinking, that's happening. But it's happening on here and it's happening somewhere else, but it's not necessarily happening in your community.
Yeah, and look, you've touched on a couple of really important things there. I mean, the first one is where you talk about weaponization, right? It's like we've come to this to talk about community and what kind of community, what do we mean by building a community for the 21st century? What does that actually mean? Because it's probably not the same as it was in the 1950s, because there were a lot of flaws in that community as well. And again, they weren't particularly very inclusive. And when you talk about the racial issues going on today, they existed in the 1950s as well, with the Windrush generation, people coming over. So it's not a new thing. The problem is that there is a certain group of politicians out there who are very, very good at stirring up division and hatred and, again, as you to use one of your words, othering,
Yeah.
creating that sense of fear. But ultimately, there's an educational thing here. There's people need to start getting out there and talking more positively about what do we mean by a modern community, a 21st century community in Britain. And again, I don't think it's actually about British and Britishness. It goes to your local community. You've just mentioned moving up to Scotland, where you're now in a relatively small, a small village, community spirit there. I'm sure there's community spirit and rivalry with other towns and villages around there as well, which is a good thing. Rivalry is not a bad thing, except for when it gets nasty, right? But I think the challenge, because look, I don't think anyone in Britain would claim that things have necessarily changed for the better when it comes to the community side of things. But I'm not sure, and this is why I called this so complex at the start,
Mm.
how you build a community for the 21st. I'm not. I'm just because I think our other problems, jobs and services, cannot easily, but they can be fixed with investment, targeted investment and having a vision. Community is so.
It all flows from the same thing. It all flows from the same thing. So, like, let's take at the point where we're recording this, there is a huge amount of community unrest, shall we say, up and down the UK, predominantly in England, but there's been bits in Scotland and Wales as well, and Northern Ireland as well, I've seen. And it is, in essence, people who are in poor communities, generally poor communities, complaining about people coming in from the outside and putting strain on the poor resources that they've got and making them even poorer. That is at the heart of what's going on. They might be targeting asylum seekers, and some of them are openly more racist and just basically hate brown people and Muslims. And I've heard them attacking gays. I've heard them attacking basically third generation migrants, right? I mean, as if third generation migrants aren't British, which is just, I mean, these people are mad and they're being allowed to flourish in this place. But it all comes back down to, right, everybody aspires, you used the aspiration word earlier, everyone aspires for better for their kids. And with today's economy, as not working as it is, and with social services and public services and infrastructure as poor as it is, people are looking and thinking, my kids are worse off than I was. And that is the thing that bugs them. And it's very easy to go out there and blame the other. And you're right, I do talk about othering. Because the thing at the moment is it's all the fault of these asylum seekers. Well, it isn't. I mean, asylum seekers get nothing. People talk about these asylum hotels. It's not a 4-star hotel right, with silver service and the jacuzzi still open in the pool. All of that's shut. It's quite literally bunk beds in rooms with nothing, right? That's the reality of what they're actually getting. So it's not like they're in luxury. And people say, "Well, I can't get that." Well, I don't think you would have wanted that
I
in
don't
the
think you
first
want it.
place. What you actually want is better jobs, better services, being able to go and see a doctor, and all of the basic things that we were talking about. This community breakdown is the result of the other two. So I don't think we can fix it without saying, how do we stop poor people from being poor?
Yeah. Which all ultimately brings it back to that concept of a vision that helps all communities. Because again, whether you talk about the deindustrialization of Britain and how that impacted, obviously a number of people got quite rich. There's a large, and actually
That always
it's not
happens.
just a few people. It was, again, the City of London was created, the M4 corridor, and all of that. There's a lot of services wealth was created off the back of our deindustrialization. Unfortunately, there were a lot of communities that were, use that term, left behind, and they weren't just left behind by Thatcher. I know that's something I love to say. They were left behind by successive
Yeah,
governments of every colour,
yeah.
because they just assumed that that people in these communities that had already always voted Labour would continue to always vote in Labour, which of course we saw did not happen with Boris Johnson, or it was just too big a problem to solve. Because you're literally talking about, I mean, the scale of um, destruction is the wrong word, but decline
Decline, yeah.
across not just the north of this country, but again, the Midlands, the southwest. It's almost beyond belief for such a short space of time.
And where people then start talking about how communities fragmenting and how you've got people coming in and taking the resources. Again, it's the poor areas who have the problems. If you have got, right, and it tends to be the suburbs and towns and outwards from there. Cities tend to be pretty diverse because that's the place where younger people go and they're following jobs from whatever background, right? Cities tend to be quite diverse. Urban areas tend to be quite diverse and younger. Far less of an issue, right? Where riots do then break out, it's poverty as much as anything else, or suddenly a tinderbox thing sort of blows it up. But community cohesion there works to the point where you've got all these different people from different backgrounds. And I think that horrifies some people who really do want to kind of go back to this mythical 1950s past that they kind of either don't remember properly or in some cases have been told about, right? They're trying to go back to this thing that didn't actually exist. But for so many people, right, and I think this is the point, for all this tinderbox situation, the countries, like, have got all these community issues at the moment. I think most people look at this and scratch their heads and go, what on earth are you doing? What on earth are you talking about? Why have we got people banging on about flags suddenly and graffitiing bad renditions of our flag on mini roundabouts? What on earth are they doing? And for the people who are het up in the middle of it, it's the entirety of human existence and the world is going to end unless everybody joins in with this. But for most people who, again, aren't glued to scrolling on wheels on this, we all just kind of look and go, have you all gone mad?
Yeah, quite. But the danger of it is, if nobody says anything, if nobody challenges this, and I don't mean challenge it in kind of, the having the police manning barricades between one set of protesters and then obviously the counter protesters that come out in force as well. That is not going to drive any kind of community cohesion, right? What is needed is a conversation, a debate about these kinds of things. And look, I genuinely do not like talking about immigration. I don't like talking about asylum seekers, partially because I think it ultimately gets so heated and angry, where I'm very much of we've got to take the heat out of this situation and talk about it. And look, if we want to talk about flaws of the past or mistakes of the past, there hasn't been enough debate about this kind of a thing, about things like immigration in the past. It was
Yep.
generally avoided
Oh,
by all
yep.
politicians,
Yep.
avoided because If you tried to bring it up as a negative, you were declared as racist. Now, look, immigration is a complex thing as well.
Yep.
And it is not racist to argue that there are far too many people coming into the country.
No.
It's racist if you say, I don't want those type of people coming into my country,
As I
right?
said, brown
Which is what,
people and
yeah,
Muslims, right?
exactly. And so, but a debate has needed to happen, and it's not happened. It's not happened in my lifetime. Instead, what we've had, instead of a debate, is a few pockets of angry politicians stirring up hatred. And if we look at our current government, if we look at our current, the current politicians in Labour, and I think in some of the other mainstream parties as well, they are still actively avoiding this conversation. And instead, what they're doing is they're going down the road of, oh, it's a problem, we need to fix it as well. So we're going to get stricter on these things.
I would like to volunteer to talk briefly about it, and let's try and do this without getting myself into trouble, right? Because I do still have political aspirations, which I'm now putting a gun to my own head by talking about immigration. So I think here's my take on it, right? The current levels of migration post Brexit, sorry, but Boris's Brexit deal threw the borders open. The current levels are completely unsustainable, right? And every government prior to this would have had something significant. Cameron wanted to get it down into like 100,000 or something, which was difficult to do.
It was tens of thousands.
So you're right, tens of thousands, that was difficult. But now we're into huge numbers. It is unsustainable. It isn't racist to say that it's not sustainable, because if nothing else, basic maths, we're not building that many houses. So we are just piling pressure onto communities where people are coming and we simply can't house them, we can't educate them, we can't keep them healthy, we can't do any of that. So we do have to reduce numbers, and I'd suggest at this point reduce numbers fairly significantly, because we're creating big issues. Here's the point, right? It is not easy to do that. And we have had a succession of politicians from both of the leading parties and now Reform UK basically giving sound bites for things they know they cannot. Farage is the latest one to do this. Send them to Ascension Island. It's like, do you understand how much that would cost, right? If nothing else.
A lot more than hotels.
But practically speaking, how are you actually going to do this thing? The Rwanda thing. Apart from the fact that you can't just send people away and say, no, you can't claim asylum, right? There's all kinds of treaties that we are not just signatories to, but we wrote the damn things, right? We can't just send people away for good. But even if Rwanda was willing to accept all of these vast numbers of people, which they weren't, to get there, right? So you got all of these people who've come across on small boats. Fine. First of all, you've got to actually register them. Then you've got to house them somewhere while you're making a decision. You've got to have the Home Office personnel to actually go through and process all of this stuff and declare that somebody is actually illegal and we're not going to have you, right? Then you've actually got to go and detain them and put them in somewhere and then stick them on a plane, right? Where the plane company and the insurers and all the rest of it are actually happy to do that, and then fly them to an place, not necessarily Rwanda, where you can actually land and take people off again. All of the people who say, just send them away. You can't just stick people on a plane and send them to country X, because country X is as sovereign as we are, right? People generally don't like a plane load of people coming and landing and just getting off. Isn't that literally what their protest is? Just send them away. How, right? I'm very happy to talk about the noise and like the rhetoric, but with all of these things, the devil is the detail, and you've got to have something that actually works. And with respect to it, for 10 years and more, we have had politicians offering us crayon policies, literally scrawled in a red crayon on a sheet of paper by a small child. And Boris Johnson was the absolute worst of the worst at this, right, with, frankly, moron policies. But people are still clinging on to these things like there's an easy solution. And I'm sorry, but there just isn't, right? And admitting that is the start place. Once we accept that you can't just fix this overnight, that is when we can try and actually have a grown-up conversation.
No, I agree. But two things that I'll probably say to this as well. One thing is really just a clarification point, because obviously you've talked about high rates of immigration, and we've also talked about asylum seekers, and the two things are different. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people in these protests and stuff don't see it that way. They get very het up about all of about just people coming over, right? The reality is, look, the small boats issue is an issue. It is absolutely it is an issue. It is a financial issue and it is a human issue, and
Usually.
as far as I am concerned. But it is not an issue that is going to break this country in terms of us being able to afford to 30,000, 40,000 asylum seekers, okay? The number sounds huge. It does. But we are a country of 65 million people, okay? It's not huge in the context of the size of the country, and it's also not huge when compared to the number of asylum seekers in every other major European country today.
Which are a lot more.
Exactly. But immigration, legal immigration, if you want to call it that, and again, I don't like using that term because being an asylum seeker isn't illegal either, but but official visa-led immigration where you come into the country because you've got a job or whatever, or you're a student or whatever else, that is incredibly high historically. And again, fixing it in this instance is, first of all, it's not about, for me, it's not necessarily about the number. I think part of the problem is everyone's obsessed with the number. The politicians are like, we've got to get it down to this. That's reasonable. No, what's reasonable is what we need, right?
Yep.
And as a country, if we need, and this goes back to jobs and services, right? If we need loads of nurses,
Yep.
if we need loads of people to build houses that we don't have in the country right now, then we should bring people in from abroad to do that if we don't have them here already. But when we do that, we then have to invest in the services to make sure that the other problems you're talking about are
that's
prevented.
The point. And that is, but that's the point, because for the people who are basically attacking asylum seekers, and by the way, you're absolutely right. Legal migration is a completely different thing. And since we decided to take back control of the border, the Tory government decided to open it wide. I mean, like literally their version of. I think a lot of people thought Brexit means stop foreigners. Actually, the Tories thought more foreigners, right? Legal foreigners.
And I have heard that on the doorstep. I've also heard that on the doorstep. Literally that exact thing.
Exactly.
I thought all the foreigners would stop coming into the country.
Yes.
On the day after, and I'm like, I don't even know how to respond to that, But anyway.
But the point is, right, this whole point about people are attacking, and it's all, and at the moment, it really is asylum seekers. These young men are coming into our country and they're being given this and they're being given free healthcare and education and they shouldn't be getting it. Right, fine. Here's the point, right? You people who are objecting to other people getting stuff that you're getting, right? Do you want to pay the money so that British people, as you would define them, right, which is racist, but would British people then get the services? And the answer is no, because they vote against that all the damn time.
Constantly.
So they can't say, these people are coming and getting it from veterans and our brave boys. You're the people who cut the money to them, right? You're the people who don't want money to be spent on benefits for anybody, right? You think everybody is a scrounger who isn't you. Right? This is the mentality of some, and this is the whole point about how do I define community? It starts off with me, my neighbours, my street, my little community, and then it goes from there. Because ultimately, to quote George Harrison, it's I, me, mine, right? That's where most people think community starts and then stops a lot of the time, unless it's football, in which case it's England, right? Which is great because, let's celebrate immigration because you're celebrating the land of the Angles, who aren't British. They're German, but never mind, good history lesson. This is the point. You do not want to spend the money on anyone other than yourself. So when all the people bang on and on and on about all of these foreigners getting all of this, they don't want to give it to British people either. That's the sad reality of it. And again, we've got to be honest with ourselves. Do we want to build the country where there's enough houses for people, there's enough doctors, nurses, teachers, like the roads haven't got big potholes and grass like growing out the cracks and all of the rest of it? Do we want that or not? And if we do want that, as we don't have enough people to go off and do some of those things, and we don't have enough working age people paying the taxes, we need migration, which is why we've had migration, not just for the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 100 years or whatever. We have had migration since forever in this country. Exactly. And people don't seem to get that.
No, they absolutely don't. And look, one of the things about both the community debate and the immigration debate that always makes me chuckle a little bit is This idea that lots of people coming over from abroad, from other countries, are destroying the community spirit we have. They come in and therefore they're putting two and two together and making not a number that's four, right? Because they haven't come over and destroyed that community. The community has actually been destroyed by all the other things we've talked about earlier in the episode. But what I find really comical about it is most people who migrate to other countries actually have a much stronger community spirit than the people in the country that they've gone to. And again, we see this all the time. My mum lives in a community in Bury that is one of those, as you say, one of those really poor communities full of people from, all kinds of different countries.
Yep.
She has a much greater sense of community with all of the people there than she ever had when she lived in a community that was purely white British people.
Absolutely.
Which is always makes me chuckle, but people don't see it. And I think that is really because of the fear, because of the scaremongery that goes with it, and because of what it ultimately is, which is distraction. It's distraction from the real problem. And whether it is blaming immigrants, whether it's blaming work-shy people who can't be bothered to go out to work and are claiming benefits, whether it's attacking ultra liberal concepts like being gay, because apparently that is ultra liberal, it's like, or just general wokeism. It's like we're in a place where people want to get into power, and to get into power the best way to do it is to divide and conquer, divide as many people as possible, and find people who can't defend themselves to blame. But to bring it back to community, a community for the 21st century, building a community for the 21st century, obviously is one that has to be built around some of the concepts that you've talked about, around my family, my neighbors, my local community, and then expand from there. But it also needs to be more inclusive. It needs to be probably built not around a major industry in that town, because that's something that doesn't exist anymore. I'm almost trying to think. It's like, what does it look like? I don't know. What does that? Is it the same as what we had in the 1990s, just a bit more inclusive, or is it something else?
We're never going to fix community because people don't get on with people. That's just the sad nature of humanity. Is there's always going to be some arsehole neighbour somewhere that's annoying people with whatever it is they're doing. There's always going to be the objectionable person who manages to get themselves elected onto the council and they're always objecting to whatever else. There's always going to be somebody that someone else is annoyed by, right? Utopia doesn't exist, despite all the people who go out there saying, we can have utopia if we do this. No. But what we can do, and again, it comes back down to money, an opportunity, an aspiration, and the basics. If we can get it so that people actually feel relatively content with who they are, where they live, the things around them, the immediacy of their neighbours and their district, town, city, wherever it is, then a lot of these rows about foreigners, incomers, however you want to describe it, asylum seekers, stops. Because people who are generally happy with things don't care about what other people are getting, because they're actually happy enough with where they're at. And this is the solution to fixing this community discohesion that we're getting at the moment. That's not even a word, but never mind. The way of fixing it is by fixing the basics that go again into the other bits. But as for the getting it so that people are actually nice about other people, I think there's just an element of, there's people of all kinds of different opinions out there, and actually respecting other people's views is kind of what Britain's supposed to be. We go out there and fight wars supposedly for freedom from tyranny, and yet the people who are then wrapping themselves in the flag and going on about, I want my freedom of speech, don't want me to have my freedom of speech, or you, or the other people who disagree with them. They want tyranny of themselves, the tyranny of the mob, all of this stuff that's been going on about your specific court cases. What is this mob rule? You've got senior politicians now arguing against trial by jury, which is the most bizarre thing. Conservative politicians, right? The party of law and order now basically saying that, jury trial is a bad thing or something. But we've gone into this really, really, really dark place. And I think we've just got to almost take a step back for a minute and say, you know what, right? If you want to go out there and hang flags, go and do it. There needs to be a thing about, okay, look, police, don't start going and cracking down in councils or whatever. Don't start cracking down on people hanging flags, because with respect to it, there's only so many flags from China that they can actually buy. Let them go and hang the flags, not the graffitiing bit, but let them go and hang the flags, and then they'll get bored, and then they'll move on to the next thing. And then, once we've done that, let's go back and make your cool Britannia a thing again. Because there was this spell, right, when we were both a little bit younger, when Britain was cool. The Union flag was cool. It was on dresses. It was on everything. It was this identity thing about, hey, Britain is this fantastic place. And it still is. And the flag needs to be the symbol of that, rather than... I think the problem I've got with a lot of it is they're not flying the flag because they're proud of it. They're flying the flag because they want to use it as a weapon against somebody else, right? They're flying it out of hate of the other.
It was the same thing we saw in the 1980s with that flag being taken, with the flag being taken, almost taken over by a very, very far right and even fascist sets of individuals. But I think, bringing it back to the economy piece that you talked about, and Cool Britannia's actually a really good example of this. That kind of new golden age that Britain went through post Empire in the 90s and and through the noughties.
Well, I was going to say Tony Blair, but actually it started while John Major was Prime Minister.
It absolutely started with John Major, which is completely fair. But it was driven by strong economy and high investment in services and in communities from that perspective. It could, because I always think about this in, like, if you think of the early 2000s, right? The early 2000s, immigration was pretty high. It was pretty high in the early 2000s as well. There were people who complained about it. There were people who got angry about it. There were occasional bits of disruption. Nothing like what we're seeing today. The reason was because people didn't have as many issues. They could get a GP appointment. Their schools were not overcrowded, all of those things. And unfortunately, again, that 2 and 2 makes not a number equaling 4 has happened again.
There is another thing, right? And again, people do shy away from this, right? There is a race issue, because in the early 2000s, right, it was Eastern European migration, and you've got people coming across primarily from white Christian countries to live in the UK. That is, I think, people were objecting at the time. Why are all these Poles coming and taking the jobs that we don't want to do, right? But now there seems to be this thing where the people who are coming across are predominantly brown people, right? As it keeps being described, why are all these brown people here? They're not brown people, they're people. Oh, and they're all Muslims. And what's the problem with Muslims, right? And that's the difference. So there's a very small number of hardcore racists who are fanning the flames of what I lovingly describe as parochial bigotry, right? And it's not that they're not overtly racist parochial bigots. They just don't like other people, right? Of whatever it is. And for some...
Well, they don't like people that are not exactly like them, which doesn't necessarily mean colour of the skin or anything like that. It's literally just people who are not exactly like them.
I mean, look, to give an example of this, I won't say who said this, right? But back when I was doing local politics on Teesside, somebody who was relatively prominent within the community posted about me that basically I'm not from here, right? I'm never going to get here, as in understand what people's are. I'd be much better off if I just went home. Literally, right? I was told, as somebody who'd lived there for more than 10 years at that point, basically to sod off back where I came from because I'm an outsider. And that was the bit where I just giggled and I'm like, wow, is that actually a thing? And part of that is because I'm a Lancastrian and I was living in a town which was banging the Yorkshire drum quite hard. For me, it was a perfect example of exactly the othering that I'm talking about. It doesn't actually have to be about race. It's just, you're not from around here.
I mean, I'm only laughing because, as you well know, I live in Sheffield and I am a Lancastrian by birth. I've lived in this city for 30 years. Almost double the amount of time that I lived in Lancashire, but I will never truly feel like I've been accepted. I'll never be a Yorkshireman, right? I'll never be seen from that perspective.
And so for me, like, you've got a small number of racists who are fanning the flames of a lot of people who are just your parochialism. And I say parochial bigotry, but a lot of it's not bigotry. They're just being an arse, right? But I think most people, right, once this all calms down, and again, once the social media thing slows down a little bit, most people in Britain are thoroughly decent. Most people don't actually want to go and burn people out of buildings. Most people don't think rioting and attacking your neighbours who might have been there for 30 years, as you just said, most people think that's probably a bad thing. And this is it. Once everything calms back down, we get back to some kind of sanity.
I do absolutely agree.
But
I love doing that. There has to be action to calm it down, because I don't think it just calms down. I think genuinely there has to be action to drive the calming downness, because as we look through history, without me trying to mention things that I don't want to mention on here, mob rule absolutely can expand very quickly into ordinary communities and people who are decent people who will not happily, but they will accept the horrific, and that is a problem that, and I'm not saying that that's the direction this country is going to go in, but we only have to look at the United States right now and the decline there, which is far, far starker than it is here.
God,
it's bad here, but what's going on over there right now is shocking. So I think it's more about how can you challenge it?
So let's play a scenario. So let's assume, right, that the Farage-driven and Kemi Badenoch's like desperately trying to cling on, and Jenrick's trying to outflank her or whatever else. But let's assume that the Faragist push works, and the government says, "Fine, we're going to scrap all asylum hotels, and yes, we're gonna do tents, right? So we're going to use former RAF bases or whatever, and we're going to do the performative cruelty bit. We'll stick them in tents." That does not stop a damn thing. All that happens is all the protests move. And we already had this. So when you had a Conservative government with Conservative ministers, former Home Secretary Priti Patel was protesting against the use of RAF, I think it's Wethersfield, in her constituency, being used for precisely that. When you were sticking people on a barge, people were protesting outside the barge. So you are not going to stop this madness by giving succor to the madness, right? It cannot be done. It's going to be done gently. I honestly think the only way that we can actually try and get through this is some of the stuff that's going on now is they're trying to provoke it in terms of, we're going to go out there and we're going to provoke all of you woke people and you're going to go and react against us and then we can go around. There's kind of an element of just like, the flags bit, like I said, right? The flags thing is being done out of hate. It's provocative. They want your white people like me to complain about it. And I'm like, I've kind of laughed at it a bit and gone, really? Is that kind of what you're reduced to? But you know what? If you want to stick flags on everything, go knock yourselves out, right? Because then you'll kind of go, right, we've got the flag on everything. Like now we're properly telling people, and nothing will change, and they'll find themselves back in the same position of the community is still in a mess because it's poor. The community is still in a mess because there's not enough teachers, doctors, all of the other basic economic things. There's not enough jobs. And then, well, okay, so what are we going to do about it? I think we've got to let this burn itself out, because if we start trying to react to what they're doing, it just gets worse.
I agree, and I don't think what I'm talking about is the reacting to, say, the protests and things like that. But I do think that the language of the media, the language of politicians, those that are not on that side, that are not on the Farage side, needs to change. It needs to change to talk about the positives. Well, firstly, for immigration in general, forgetting for a moment about asylum seekers and small boats, which is a separate thing, but immigration in general, positive conversations about what immigrants bring to this country, which we have not heard from politicians, from senior politicians, for a long time now. I don't feel. And then on the other side, the small boat side, it's bringing it back. You talk about being gentler. It's bringing it back to the human aspect, the human drama and the human experience. They are human beings in risking their lives in dinghies.
Well,
not just in the Channel, but in the Mediterranean and all over various other places. for me, that's what needs to happen. But I do agree with you that it has to challenging the protests, challenging the 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 flags on lampposts and stuff. It only serves their purpose because it
Yep.
just brings it's a reaction, and it's something
Yep.
that they can then post online. Rebuilding community, rebuilding that cohesion takes a long time. It took a fair amount of time to actually destroy it. It takes a long time to rebuild, but it definitely starts with creating jobs, rebuilding services,
Yeah.
making people feel like they are progressing, like their living standards are
Because
getting better.
people who've got stuff don't complain about other people having stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, we saw this in the 90s. We've seen this at other times throughout history. It's about economic ruin. You get
Yeah.
away from the economic ruin and you invest in the right things across all communities, not
Yeah.
just in pockets, and you will start to fix these problems. But it will take a significant amount of time.
So on just to try and I suppose to sort of bring this up to a close again, the community bit is fixable, but it's not fixable by tokenism. And at the moment, we've got way too much tokenism, whether it's flags or protests or whatever else. It's the hard yards of actually working in communities and talking to people about what they need. And people will bring up asylum seekers and a long list of complaints about this and that. Okay, fine. So what do you need? Well, I need them to go home. Okay, why? What do you need? And once we get to that, we get to jobs, services, infrastructure, opportunity, aspiration, all of that. So we're back to. I mean, look, Keir Starmer tweeted something. I think it was today, and he's talking about we're going to basically bring apprenticeships back, and we're going to go out there and we're going to enable young people to go off and do this. And you know what? It's fine. It's worthy and whatever else. But the bit that's missing is the context. There's an element of and so what, right? The big picture bit is what's missing, and this at the moment is why Farage is winning and the Tories are desperately trying to cosplay Farage, because Farage is going out with the big picture bit, which is we are team reform. Look, we've even got a football shirt with a flag on backwards, right? We've got a football shirt made in Turkey or wherever it is, right? Very British. They've got this whole, you're either with us or you're a traitor thing going, and they're going to keep on pushing that. The reaction from other politicians needs to be, right, this is our patriotism. This is our community spirit. This is our vision for the future. The one thing I heard, sorry, I know you want to jump back in, but just one last point. The thing I heard this week that really got me really intrigued was listening to Ed Davey, so my party leader, Lib Dems, Ed Davey, on an interview somewhere, and he's saying, look, there's too many politicians who have been defending, basically the indefensible. They're defending the status quo. And then he says, the status quo is awful, right? We shouldn't be defending where we're at now because it's awful. And you think, my God, somebody who's actually paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what we've been saying throughout these podcasts, right? Which is that ultimately, throughout history, politicians are driven by the status quo. What you want to do is actually have the status quo. That is standard politics, right? Because you don't want great upheaval constantly. But when things are this bad, you absolutely need to take the risks and to invest and to do the things that challenge the norm, that challenge the status quo. And I'm glad he said that, because he is a major politician from that perspective. I just wish that in government, that our government, who are the only ones right now who can truly change things, would recognise this at the moment, because rather than, again, you mentioned the Tories cosplaying. Labour are doing that as well at the moment, a smaller, but they are doing it to a certain extent because they are, and I think they're doing it more out of fear, in that they are worried about the votes they're going to lose to Reform and to other parties, and so they are like, well, we need to keep those votes, so we need to appease the mob, right?
I saw something else, and it was a reel that somebody had done, and they were interviewing Reform supporters, and it all starts off with, why do you support Reform? And they all start talking about migration and asylum or whatever. Yeah, Reform again, your team Reform. And then they start talking, they slip in the other policies that Reform have got, which are going to absolutely smash these people over the head. Because ultimately, what they're all talking about is lack of services, lack of jobs, lack of opportunities. Oh, Reform are going to give all your money to millionaires. And then Reform want to like dismantle the NHS. Well, and then but they're still team reform. It's like there is that element of go out there and play to the basics because all of this other stuff is noise. What do people want? They like a job that pays their bills. They'd like a better future for their kids, and they'd like some basic services. Go out there and start saying these things aren't here now, but we can have them, and there's a message to be done. And you said about the government slightly cosplaying reform. I think they're terrified because reform have got a vision. People don't know what the vision is at this point, but like it's a different future. So go on, offer them that. I can't run an election on change and then offer continuity in government.
No, 100%. And I think just kind of to wrap this up on the role of government in this debate, what we've talked about there, you've brought it back to kind of services and jobs and that sort of thing. The policies that the government needs to be focused on are those two things, because those will ultimately help to then recreate or create a better sense of community. What the government must not do is try to put legislation in to force the creation of a type of community, because again, that never works out well. Governments really need to stay out of that. The community almost needs to naturally develop. The community spirit needs to naturally develop out of the conditions that exist at the time. And if you create good conditions, jobs, services, then you will get a good overall community feel, in my mind.
I think it is the vision thing that's missing, and the great politicians of whatever party, of whatever era, always had the vision thing going.
Yeah.
Always, right?
Look,
going and talking about here is the future, whatever the language is.
Look,
what's Labour's vision of the future? What's the Tories' vision of the future?
I started this video by bashing Margaret Thatcher, but what I will say is that Margaret Thatcher was a person of vision. The vision of what her vision, and her vision also came from a position of wanting to create a great country. Yeah, whether or not she achieved that, and whether it was a great country for everyone, we can debate on a separate call. But the reality is that she had vision, and people followed her for it. And there's been great vision in the past as well. Labour politicians in particular, just to kind of close this bit off about Labour politicians over the last, to be honest, since back to Tony Blair, have actually been very frightened of the vision piece, vision politics. They've been much more. People don't want vision. They don't want that. That's not what people want. They just want, to your point, jobs and services and everything else. That's what they want. That is true to a point, but not when we're in the state that we're in now. We need, again, if it's Keir Starmer, he's the Prime Minister, he needs to paint a picture for people of what does this country look like in 10, 20, 30 years.
Yep.
That's your vision, because you have the potential to create that, but only if you actually
I think the final point that I'm going to make is, and there's an element of party politics to this. The losers this week, few weeks, this month, whatever you want to put it, right? The losers are the Conservative Party, who I genuinely think have gone mad. You cannot outflank Reform UK and Farage to the right, as they seem to be doing. And this, they've been using this crisis trying to reinvigorate themselves, and they keep putting out post after post after post after post that's literally denying reality, right? Denying everything that they did. And they're being ridiculed for it. And then they're going even further and basically saying that, the party of law and order, as was, now thinks that law and order is a terrible idea and we should just have mob rule or whatever else. I genuinely think they've lost their remaining brain cells, and this is the point where they just descend into the political abyss. And we're already starting to see the sort of tip over now in terms of scores. And, there's increasing numbers of polls coming out that show them finishing in fifth.
Yeah.
In terms of number of seats. Fifth.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel outlandish because they've literally got nothing to say. Robert Jenrick's entire contribution to the thing is going up a ladder and sticking a flag on a lamppost. If that's literally all he's got as the exciting replacement for Kemi Badenoch, then they really are finished. Anything to do with principle has now completely gone out the window, and it's just brazen, shameless, We still exist. Please vote for us. And it's just pathetic.
And so, on the note that the Conservatives may well be finished, which I'm not entirely unhappy to hear, I'm a little bit depressed about what might replace them, I think we'll end it there. Thank you, Ian, as always. We'll be back again soon with where we'll talk about something else, and we'll get very angry about it as we go, I am sure.
But hopefully, in the meantime, right, a lot of you might be seeing not the whole episode. You might be seeing all of the reels and things that we're putting out there. If you are, brilliant. Make sure you're hitting like and subscribe so that you're getting all of these things fed through. It really drives the algorithm as well, so then you get more of us two ranting incoherently.
We love to do.
We do.
All right, we'll leave it there.
See
Thank
you
you,
later.
everyone.